Welcome to Breadcrumbs. This is the prophetic journal of a girl who's more than happy to eat the crumbs off the master's table. If you're like me, then listen and be encouraged, that even in the whispers and mere shadows, our God still speaks, and he has a lot to say. So here's what can go really wrong if we don't get this right. One of my closest friends, a Christian Jew, she's been sending me notes with updates on how different members of her family who are still over in Israel are being kidnapped, wounded, and killed. And in return, I'm weeping with her. I'm contending in prayer for her family. I'm grieving with those who grieve, as a sister grieves for a sister. As the days have gone by, her responses have started to change a little bit. Today, she wrote me this. Are you guys even remotely prepared for how much Satan hates Jews? Bloodline, biological, DNA Jews. Satan hates us. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, are we safer as a Jewish DNA people who love Jesus among Christians, or are we safer among other Jews? And where would Jesus be? Who would he be among? What she's telling me is this. She's telling me that she is strongly questioning her safety among Christians that are not Jews like her, that maybe she should retreat and go be with other Jewish people only. And she's genuinely pondering if maybe that's a good idea because maybe Jesus is more with them. I told her I understand the instinct to want to tuck herself away among people who share the same kind of pain, who have a shared understanding. But just because I understand doesn't mean I think it's right. There's a time for wounded people to get together, to share in a kind of collective wounding for a time, a collective grief. But is that where they're going to heal? Or is that where they will reinforce each other's wounding? Haven't we been taught by Jesus himself to ask, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? His family is multinational. And he is not more among some of us than others. And I am struggling as I see more and more of my Jewish Christian friends pulling into groupthink. Haven't we learned anything over the past 4 years? The dangers of fortifying within group identity to the exclusion of everything else, and how it makes an enemy of everyone else. In response to me, this is what she said. I'm a Jewish Christian right now. And I am 100% cool with that. I would rather be a Christian who dies on Team Jew than any other thing. No disrespect. I'm just the neighborhood cat to anyone else. And so what one of my best friends is telling me is that I'm a neighbor that she's happy to visit every now and then, but I'm not her family because I can't identify conclusively through my family line that I am a bloodline DNA Jew. Then she's not on my team. This isn't okay. This is what fear does. Fear makes you pick teams. Aren't we all a team in the family of God? Aren't we all family? I don't like what I'm seeing. I don't like what I'm hearing. And I, for one, am so weary, so sick of the overt and obvious and persistent efforts of the enemy to divide and to tear and to fracture the people of God. And of the handful of creative ways he's done that in the past few years, this one, it hurts the most, and I know he's just getting started. I fell asleep crying and begging Jesus to talk to me, and I had this dream. In the dream there were 2 teams, and they were frantically grappling competitively for this tiny little diamond and a corresponding little silver piece. It reminded me of a small diamond stud earring with the backing. It was very epic. There were car chases and shattered window glass and machine guns. But there was this farcical vibe to it all, kind of like those Quentin Tarantino movies where the violence is just over the top, shockingly so, but the characters, it's like they all have a smirk on their face. In this dream, it was like the players on both teams. They were wondering why they were going to all this trouble for something so small and of such little value, and yet they were compelled to keep going. More glass had to be shattered. At one point, both teams, in exhaustion, they just kind of collapse on a set of stairs, all together, side by side, and they don't even realize that this precious thing that they've been fighting over It had fallen out of someone's pocket and was just lying there on the stairs. In Jeremiah 17, a diamond represents hardness, a deep etching. In Daniel 2, silver, it's the lesser kingdom. Why are we fighting over something of lesser value with such a hardened, stubborn resolve? And what good is a single earring anyway? A set of earrings is meant to be a pair. I've had a fairly steady trickle of words and pictures and revelations popping up through scripture for over a month now. It was about a city. The many, many things he's spoken to me about, they add up to this. There's a city, both physical and spiritual, that is caught in a net right now. And there are a people, both physical and spiritual, who are separated right now, but they're not meant to be. They're meant to find each other again. They're meant to be entwined in order to really be free. In late August, I had a vision of a group of people in white robes, and they were marching around a desert city. I could see the pale sand around what looked like a rock or fortress. The people marched around it 7 times, and a little arrow appeared to indicate very specifically that they were walking around it clockwise. You've got to be thinking of Jericho. That's what I thought. Joshua 6. Now Jericho, a fortified city with high walls, was tightly closed because of the people's fear of the sons of Israel. No one went out or came in. The Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand. Now you shall march around the city, all the men of war circling the city. You shall do this, one each day for 6 days. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. When they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people will cry out with a great shout, a battle cry, and the wall of the city will fall down in its place, and the people will go up, each man going straight ahead, climbing over the rubble." This story is about a city fortified against God, and it's undone by a kind of encircling. There is old lore that says that people marched around Jericho in a counterclockwise direction. This is not something that can be fact-checked, but it's also not entirely unfounded, because by definition, counterclockwise means to move against the sun, the opposite direction of the sun. In the northern hemisphere, the practice of turning counterclockwise was linked to undoing in ancient tradition. Counterclockwise was seen as sinister. It was seen as the direction of the devil. If you've ever read books about magic or books about the Salem witch trials, you'll have heard the term widdershins. That was the term given for moving against the sun, counterclockwise. It was associated with witchcraft and with rituals. There literally was a ceremony called the ceremony of riddance. Now in my vision, the people were moving clockwise in the same direction as the sun. And so I believe it spoke to a kind of anti-Jericho march. So rather than the undoing of a city, it spoke to the mending or the upbuilding of ruined walls and crumbled foundations. Interestingly, in this vision, the city was superimposed onto an island that I know from my childhood. It was called Rock Island. I need to talk about cities for a moment. Psalm 107. We wander looking for a city, but finding none until God makes a straight way to his city to dwell in. Did you catch that? The straight way. There are so many passages in the Bible about how in the end God will gather his people. They will come streaming towards the city, and he will make a straight path. He will level mountains that are in their way. He will raise up valleys, all to make a straight path. And in the Jericho account, did you catch that he said he wanted the people to walk in a straight line directly over the rubble? The straight way, the straight path, is always with reference to his way, God's way. He makes crooked things straight. The way we see cities today is not how they were seen in the Bible. To us, living in a city is just a life choice. It's based on preference. But back then, cities were a guarded encampment against enemies. They always had walls meant to keep the people within safe and to keep enemies out. The root word for city means nakedness. And so you could say that cities were a covering from exposure. Spiritually, cities were walls of spiritual covering, a kind of encircling protection. My family and I visited Germany a few years ago, and we stayed in a tiny little town called Dinkelspool. And there is a thick wall, fully intact, circling the little town. And built into the wall were a series of watchtowers. One time, the Lord hollered into my spirit, "You are encircled and encamped." He showed me a picture of Jesus hovering above our home with his arms spread out like wings that were laced with rainbow, and those wings were encircling our red house. The kind of city that we're looking for as God's kids is the same kind that Abraham was looking for. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. There is a wrong kind of city, though. In Genesis 4:17, it says that after Cain was banished, he went and he built a city and he named it after his son. This city was not stamped with the name of God. It was stamped with the name of self, a kind of self-fortification, self-establishment, self-protection. Genesis 11 is no different. The Tower of Babel was all about man-made up building in the name of human pursuit of power. And it is commonly known and hinted at in the Bible that ancient cities that were not built on God were built with blood. Habakkuk 2:12, "Woe to him who builds a town with blood and founds a city on iniquity." 2 Kings 3:27, "He then grabbed his oldest son, who was to be the next king, and he sacrificed him as an offering on the city wall." There was an ancient practice called foundation sacrifices, and it refers to the practice of burying a human in the foundation of a new building. The belief was that every piece of land had a spirit attached to it. Now, while we believe that God owns all land across all the earth, we know that there are powers and principalities that have taken up residence in a kind of false governance here on the earth, and they are very territorial. And so it's not entirely untrue. Every patch of land does have a spirit attached to it. These ancient people knew that far better than we did, but in fear, what they chose to do with that is to try and appease these entities. They would offer them blood in return for protection and fortification of their city walls. Listen to this, though. Hebrews 13:23. "So also Jesus suffered and died outside the city gates to make his people holy by means of his own blood. For now, we are people outside the city gates, waiting for the better city to come." Who is outside the city gates? Can't you see, like Abraham, we're not looking for an earthly city to keep us safe. There is no earthly city that is meant to be home. Not yet. For now, we are a people standing outside city gates waiting for the better city to come. We don't need the counterfeit protection of blood-infused walls because we have blood protection, no matter where we go, even if we're living in tents. Again, Hebrews 11, he was looking forward to the city with eternal foundations, whose architect and builder was God. Our city, the one that we're still waiting for, it also has blood in its foundations, but it's Jesus's blood. A few months ago, I heard the word yarad. When I looked it up, it means to come down from a high place. It speaks to soldiers streaming down a hill towards a battle, down in a valley. And it's the same term that describes how God came down to see what the nations were up to when they were building the Tower of Babel. In Genesis 11:5, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men built." There is an understanding that at the root of the word yarad is the meaning of a righteous one, of a judge from above, coming down, lowering himself, to put himself on the level of someone or something in order to judge it well. I once had a vision of one of our Supreme Court judges here in Canada. God saw him that way, as a man who would yarad with men. I saw him standing down on cracked pavement with his pristine judge uniform on, and he had his hands on the shoulder of a broken man. He was looking him eye to eye. I heard the Lord call him a good judge. A good judge is one who comes down to really see the people he's judging. That is the kind of God we have. We have a God who comes down from his high place to see what we are building, to weigh it, to judge it. In Genesis 11:5, what kind of city was being laid? He made his judgment and he put an end to it. Recently, Patricia King put out a word about how she had a vision of Jesus riding down on his war horse and circling the city of Jerusalem right now. That night, I entered into a vision that put me right on the back of his horse. I looked down and all I saw was fire, and I wept into his back. He never stopped scanning. He never stopped looking. He is weighing up the city, weighing up its walls, its foundations, and he will judge what kind of city it is. We think we can, but we can't. Only he can. And make no mistake, our God will yarad, come down upon each of our houses. He will circle them. He will weigh. He will judge to see what foundations we've built on, what walls encircle us, what kind of little cities we've built. We have to talk about Zion and Jerusalem. The Bible's just packed with these two words, and more often than not, they're not literal. The word Zion appears 7 times in the New Testament, which is very interesting. Zion means desert and fortress and highest. It definitely brings to mind what I saw, that rock that was a city in the desert that the people were circling round and round. In 2 Samuel 5:6, we read about literal Zion. It was a mountain fortress above Jerusalem that David won, and he named it the City of David. And so, Zion was the city above the city below. Zion above, Jerusalem below. Meanwhile, Jerusalem, it has several meanings. It means they will see completeness or wholeness. It can also mean foundation of peace. Jerusalem was always meant to be a pattern for the kind of city the people of God are looking for. And the only hope for that city to be shaped into the thing God meant it to be was to draw from the resources of the city above, the heavenly city, the heavenly kingdom that is Zion. So often in the Bible, Zion is referred to as the holy mountain from which things flow, dew, provision, treasures. It is the spiritual resources that we need for our time here on earth. All through the Bible, but especially in Isaiah, Zion is portrayed as a kind of spiritual mother to her earthly daughter Jerusalem. And yet Jerusalem is also portrayed as a mother that births earthly kids. And she's described as being overcome with sadness because her kids all scatter and she's left childless. Jerusalem is seen as the bride waiting to be covered from her shame, while Zion is seen as the bridegroom that will cover her, that will protect her, that will redeem and encircle her. I know that a lot of the church believes that Jerusalem is a kind of pure, sacred place that holds a kind of untaintable holiness. But that is not the picture that Scripture portrays at all. It was meant to be those things, but it totally fell short, as all earthly things do. In Isaiah, it describes the spiritual city of Zion looking down upon earthly Jerusalem and seeing it empty because the kids have scattered. All that's left behind is evil and ruin. But then a really cool thing is written. While Zion thinks that she's childless, because she can't see any of her kids down there. Isaiah 49:14. But Zion said, "The Lord has abandoned me. My Lord has forgotten me." But the Lord said, "Can a woman forget her nursing child? Your city walls, Zion, are continually before me. Lift up your eyes and look around. Do you see the returning exiles? All these gathered together, they will come to you to rebuild you. You, Zion, will indeed clothe yourself with all of them as jewels. You'll tie them on as a bride. In coming years, your land will be too cramped for the inhabitants that will come to you. The children will say, 'This place is too cramped for me.' And Zion, you will say in your heart, 'Who has borne me these children? Since I've been bereaved of my children, I'm barren, an exile, a wanderer. Who has reared these children? From where did they come?' And the Lord said, 'I will lift up my hand to the nations, and they will bring your sons in the folds of their garment, and your daughters will be carried on their shoulders.'" Unlike a lot of the church that sees physical Jerusalem as the place that houses the kids of Israel, I believe that scattered across the entire earth is where you will find the fullness of Israel. We need to talk about Ephraim. Ephraim was a half-tribe, along with Manasseh. They were Joseph's 2 sons. Ephraim is often used to represent the 10 scattered northern tribes as a whole. The meaning of Ephraim is to be fruitful, fertile, productive. In Genesis 48, Jacob, now named Israel, reaches out his right hand and he lays it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger son, and he put his left hand on Manasseh's head. He crossed his hands intentionally, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. And then Jacob, he blessed the boys, and he said, "May my name live on in them. May they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." When Joseph saw that Jacob had crossed his hands and put the youngest before the oldest, he wasn't happy about it. Blessings were supposed to go to the firstborn, and he went to grab his father's hand to move it, but Jacob refused, and he said, "I know, my son, I know. Manasseh will also become a people that will be great, but the younger brother will be greater than he. His descendants will become a multitude of nations." In Hebrew, the word that was used for Ephraim, for multitude of nations, is ha-goyim. That is the Hebrew word for Gentiles. By now, I believe that the scattered tribes have borne children who bore children who bore children, until they filled the entire earth with their blood, and most of the family connection has been lost. Most of us don't even know that we hold the blood of Israel in our veins, but we do. We are part of the family in more ways than one. On October 1st, I had a vision of a thick roped net quickly snatching up the entire city of Jerusalem and hauling it upwards, tearing out its foundations. It was really sudden and really violent and really horrible to look at. Bodies were being crushed in the net. Isaiah 25:7. On this mountain he will destroy the covering that is cast over all the peoples, and the veil that is woven and spread over all the nations. The word veil, it does mean web or covering or net, but it also means a libation, molten metal, a cast image, as in the cast images of molten gods. Amos 3:5. Then he brought me to the door of the temple courtyard where I could see a hole in the wall. He said, "Son of man, dig into the wall." And behold, there was an entrance. And he said, "Go and see the vile abominations that they're committing there." So I went in and looked, and I saw all over the walls all kinds of images of crawling things and unclean animals and all the idols of Israel. And there stood 70 men, the elders of the house of Israel. Each had a censer in his hand, and the smoke of the cloud of incense went up. And he said, "Have you seen what the elders of Israel are doing in the darkness? Each a shrine to his own idol. They say the Lord doesn't see us. He's deserted our land." I am not picking on Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem is the earthly representation of all the cities of the earth, of the way the people of God are prone to going. Almost all cities in the Bible are portrayed this way. They're about kings who built walls and towers, and somewhere along the way they grew proud. They put their hope and their trust in the walls and the towers, and in strength and in power, and it all went wrong. There were kings who put their confidence in chariots, horses, the sizes of their armies, and eventually who began to call on other gods for protection instead of Yahweh. Rare was it that a king would actually live like the foundations and walls of his city were God himself. So rarely. I don't think there's a city on earth right now that does. Just a few days ago, God spoke to me about the corruption of cities and of city worship. During the night, he said all roads lead to Rome, but then at the last minute he swapped out Rome for Jerusalem. That's a pretty popular saying. You would use it when trying to express that no matter what you try, no matter which path you take, you always end up in the same spot. That was actually literally true in the days of the Roman Empire. All the roads radiated out from the capital city. Go look up the Golden Milestone Monument in Rome. It looks like the center of a wheel with 12 spokes radiating out of it. Originally, this monument was a huge golden pillar to the god Saturn. I find it interesting that he was the god of sowing or seed, a similar meaning as Ephraim. God wanted me to make a tie between this kind of arrogance in architecture and construction and Jerusalem. To the Romans, Rome was the center of the earth, and to the Jews, Jerusalem is. And because God didn't want to leave anyone out, he also spoke out the word Kaaba. I had no idea what this word meant, but when I looked it up, Kaaba is the black cube found in Mecca that Islam holds as sacred. To Muslims, Kaaba is the center of the earth. Rome, Jerusalem, Mecca, all considered by their religions to be the center of the earth. I've spoken of this before, but I have to speak of it again. The Abrahamic family house was just completed earlier this year. There is a courtyard with 3 individual houses of worship, a mosque, a synagogue, and a church. They all face one another, and beside each one stands a pillar, each bearing the symbol of the religion that it stands for. The head rabbi of the UK was interviewed, and this is what he said. He said it was so wonderful to see the children of Abraham gathered to build a new world, and that we must recognize the part of the divine in every person so that we can shape a new world built on loving kindness. This is what happens when we build earthly cities and we put all our hope and all of our identity in them. Things go really wrong. Abraham would be horrified because he certainly wasn't looking to an earthly city. We've already established that. On October 12th, I heard very emphatically, "Come out of her." I also saw it in big, bold block letters. They had weight and substance. They even cast a shadow. And at the foot of the letters, dead autumn leaves were blowing. The hour is late. "Come out of her" comes from Revelation 18. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, possessing great authority. He shouted with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She's become a dwelling place for demons." I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so you will not be partnered in her sin and receive her plagues. To the degree that she has glorified herself, to that same degree I will impose upon her anguish and mourning and grief. For she boasts, 'I sit as queen on a throne.'" Babylon is many things in the Bible, but none of them good. If Zion is the city of open gates, God is its wall of fire, the Lord is its protection, then Babylon is any closely guarded encampment, a city, a home, a person that is protecting their version of truth, their lesser gods. Just recently I heard a word about what war really means. And she says to war God's way is to simply let Him do the fighting for us. But to war our way is all about protecting our version of the truth and fighting against what we fear threatens our version of the truth. Babylon is the taint that poisons the whole system. It's like the veins and arteries of a body that instead of running pure and clean, they run with inky black, while Zion is the city running with clear, pure water. Come out of her. Come out of the tainted, self-protecting system, because He is about to purge it. The hour is late. At the same time I heard, "Come out of her," my vision was filled with the colors sage green and purple, which was meant to draw me back to a word I'd gotten about the heather plant. Whenever I get a word about a plant, I take it to a particular friend because the Holy Spirit speaks to her through plants. I hadn't known that was a thing until I met her, but why wouldn't it be? She said, "The heather plant helps balance inner waters. It clears out toxic sludge inside our inner waters that present as other things. Clean water is a shorthand for what heather does, an internal cleaning so that everything else works. She also helps our voices be like water bubbling from a silver jug." I ended up looking up that reference. It comes from a short story by Oscar Wilde. It's about how a little bird is singing out truth and beauty, and there's a boy who's proud and arrogant, and he can't hear the voice. But there's a tree nearby that can, and is deeply blessed by it. My friend also said that spiritually, heather has something to do with the graceful learning of how to hold our peace. It helps with issues of speech and silence. My friend added that both of these are very good if you discern the timing properly. If there is merit in speech, and no cowardly behavior or false witness through omission, no hiding under a cloak of silence, then both silence and speech can be good. And so the heather plant, it's about asking, am I motivated to speak because I feel threatened? And it's also asking me, if I choose to stay silent, is it because I'm a coward? Is it because I'm hiding? And the truth is, I haven't wanted to say these things. I want to hide. I want to quietly hold my views. And yet here I am, because I'm choosing to war God's way, which is to say, I will let Him fight for me. On the most recent night of revelations and words and pictures given, I was left with a lot of beauty and a lot of hope. He spoke of a kind of entwining and restoration and hope that goes beyond the taint and ruin of all earthly cities. He spoke Psalm 24, "Who may ascend onto the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to what is false. He will receive a blessing from the Lord. This is the generation of those who diligently seek him and require him as their greatest need, who seek your face like Jacob. Lift up your heads, O gates. Be lifted up, ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in." Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Are we the generation that are going to learn to look for him and only him at our time of greatest need? I think we might be. And what does it mean for gates to lift up their heads? The head of a door was the top beam, the lintel, the part you walk under. To tell the doors to lift up their heads is to say, we need to pop your top off. You're not tall enough for my big God to enter in. To tell the gates of a city to lift up their heads, that's to say, "O city, you cannot contain my big God." And earthly cities can't. No matter what Judaism and Islam and Rome says, our God is bigger than your cities. Lift up the heads of your doors and gates, that he may enter. Your doors are too small, far too small. The number 24 came up twice that night. He showed me a large pie, and it had a lattice crust. A lattice is an interlaced structure. It has a series of parallel pieces that are interwoven with a set of perpendicular ones, so they become entwined. The pie brought to mind "Sing a Song of Sixpence." Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye, 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? Do you remember how I spoke about the meaning of the word veil in Isaiah 25? Well, lattice is the Hebrew word charak. It means a net, to entangle or snare, to catch game in a net. Jeremiah 5:26, "For wicked men are found among my people. They watch like fowlers who lie in wait. They set a trap to catch men, as a cage is full of birds, so their house is full of deceit and treachery." Amos 3:5, "Does a bird fall into a trap on the ground when there's no bait in it? Does a trap spring up from the earth when it captures nothing at all?" I believe that the people of God, on the whole, have been caught in a net. The bait of tradition, of pride, of group identity, of political power, of having a name that matters in the earth. The bait worked, the trap was sprung, and little Babylons all over the earth have been snared up in a net. 24 blackbirds trapped under the lattice, and yet the pie is opened. And when the pie is opened, those birds, they begin to sing, and it is a dish that pleases the king. And remember, lattice doesn't just mean a net, but entwined. The story doesn't end with a net. It doesn't. The story ends with the people united and singing their hearts out in praise to their king, who has freed them. In Ezekiel, Jerusalem is said to have 12 gates, 12 physical gates. But I've long believed and have been confirmed through visions, one of which was the recent one I posted about the trapdoor and how it could only be bypassed spiritually. For every gate, there's a spiritual gate. Your body could pass through the physical gate, but it's the spiritual gate that matters. And so you have 12 and 12. That's 24. The number 24 is associated with priesthood in the Bible. It's connected with worship, especially in the Jerusalem temple. In 1 Chronicles 24, the Levites are divided into 24 groups to take up different duties in the temple. The musicians were divided into 24 groups for their duties of worship. The commanders of the army, they were each given authority over 24,000 soldiers. 24, 24, 24. 12 and 12. Entwined. We also know that in Revelation, there are 24 elders before the throne, each wearing a crown. They represent a kind of governmental completeness. I think we're supposed to see this. There is an earthly reality that reflects the things of God, and there's a spiritual one as well. They're meant to be entwined. We are a house divided at the moment. God has been speaking to me of the division between Jew and Gentile, the same division that was causing trouble back when the apostles were walking the earth and trying to bring together a fractured people after having been seen as totally separate. Paul puts out a two-sided call, both to the Jew and Gentile. not to be proud, but to love, not to keep separate, but to become one. He makes a very big point of obliterating man-made walls by saying that in Christ there is no Jew or Gentile, or slave or freedman, or male or female. We're just family. And I think that's going to bear itself out in the natural in an incredible way. Isaiah 11:11-14. Then it will happen on that day that the Lord will again acquire with his hand a second time the remnant of his people. He will lift up a signal, a standard for the nations, and assemble the outcasts of Israel. He will gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. And then the jealousy of Ephraim will depart. Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, and Judah will not harass Ephraim. Ephraim and Judah will unite and will swoop down on their enemies. We're a bigger family than we realize. We've been divided, but that's not the final plan. The scattered, the ones that haven't even known that they're part of the family at all, he's going to call them and they will come. As you know, he's spoken to me non-stop about a hidden remnant. He hid them for many, many reasons. I think one of them is to hide them from themselves, so that when he calls them, their shock of joy will fuel the sense of hunger for the homecoming that they didn't even know was theirs for the taking. And they'll fly so fast to their brother's side, and instead of fighting one another, instead of being separate, they'll become one. They'll fight together, for each other, with each other. And then Jerusalem shall become true to her name. Finally, she will see completeness and wholeness. She will have a foundation of peace. And Zion, the mother above, she will look down and she will cry out, "Look at all these children. I had no idea there were so many of them. Where did they all come from?" And I can just see the twinkle in Jesus's eye at the big unveiling, because he loves when hidden things are revealed. It is the glory of a king to hide a matter, and the glory of his children to seek it out. The last thing I heard was this: king's consort. A consort is the spouse of a reigning monarch. The consort is the wife of a king. That is who we are. That is who we will be when the divided things come together, when the fractured things become whole, when the physical and the spiritual, they mesh together once and for all, when earthly gates will blow off their tops to make way for the vastness of the spiritual reality that is coming down from above, when Zion, the spiritual city, comes down upon Jerusalem, her earthly one, and they become one once and for all. That is what's coming. That is where our hope is. No more warring over earthly cities. A better thing is coming, and he'll do the fighting for us.